Alright, hey guys, Zeneku with just a relatively quick video about my preparations for tournaments, like kind of what I do for that, which I think is actually kind of interesting, kind of unique, because sometimes I feel like people might overlook this topic, and there's actually like quite a thing, like quite a few things that I would do individually that help me out, and probably one of the biggest thing, which is going to be mindset, and I'll leave that towards the end. So maybe if you think something, you can just like skip towards the end if you kind of want to just see that. But the first thing, well, I'll just go through the list of things that I have and I'll talk about more about them. So the setup of play, so kind of like the area where you're actually playing it at the event, how much caffeine you're actually taking, so leading up to the event, how much caffeine you're taking, what you're actually eating on the day. That's how that you'll get to understand more about that as we go along as well. Music, if you actually do listen to music before a game, or even just in general, like how do we feel about that? Again, then we're actually going into mindset. How do we, even how we feel about wins or how we feel about losses can actually impact the future games too. This is something that I'm kind of playing with as well. This next one, which is like almost like a pre-workout, something that's similar to caffeine but without the added caffeine. So we want things that kind of like make us more focused, and we'll talk about actually how that can be actually used against us if that comes to that stage. Hand stretching, I think actually like being able to get up after a couple games is kind of important, so we'll talk about that. Caffeine detox, and the last one, which is kind of random, actually, well, I think it's quite useful, is blood shunting. And we'll talk about how that'll be affected. So the first thing I want to talk about is like the setup they actually have. So when you're actually at the events, ideally you want to kind of know what it's going to look like, where you're going to be sitting, what the setup's going to look like, because you pretty much want to have it identical to how like how you have it at home. And the reason for that, as much as it obviously makes logical sense, is that your body is kind of like triggered to exactly how it feels when you're doing the same action. So it doesn't necessarily matter about where you're doing it, as opposed to like the physical cues that you would do. So for example, like I actually wrap my legs around the chair, I sit in a very particular way, and something like that. Now what I think is really interesting here is, like, I remember one time I usually use like over-the-cup headphones, and at this one event I had to use in-ear headphones, and for whatever reason the game sounded different, that it would throw me off to that extent. I would definitely recommend those. Still, practicing with over-the-cup headphones is kind of like more comfortable for long-term play, but definitely leading up to an event, it's almost actually beneficial to just use in-ear headphones, maybe even like 4 weeks out or something like that. That's something you could actually do. The next one is about caffeine. So I don't take any, well, during events I don't take any caffeine at all. I would only take it while I'm exercising. Again, like caffeine's a bit of a weird one. Some people it helps a lot, some people it doesn't. I actually find like I'm actually quite a fast thinker, and caffeine can just like totally mess that up. It's almost like you have too many ideas when I'm on it, at least. Whereas like with a game like Quake, you want to be focused, but you don't want to be like overstimulated. And again, I'll talk about more about that in just a second too. And sorry, one more thing about caffeine is like you should almost do. Before QC Bash this year, I did the thing where, which people do when they actually do like training in the gym as well, is that for about 1 month you just take no caffeine at all, and that pretty much is like it resets your body. So instead of like, you taking caffeine and you becoming so used to it, your body just becomes like optimized and just not constantly under adrenaline when you have the caffeine. The next one is about what to eat for food. So probably the biggest thing I would say is like, don't eat any really like densely oily foods. It's pretty much like hitting your fucking body with a sledgehammer. Like I just really, like if I eat like deep fried chicken, or if I even eat like just really fatty foods, I don't feel great. Again, it's like very particular, but for everyone. You don't want to have like, carbs that are easily digestible. You want to kind of like, how do I say, for example, like if you have like Subway, if you have like a lot of bread, it just hits you like a truck. You fucking just like can't really think after. And this is something that I think that people should really, this is probably like the key key thing about this one is like I just have a sugary drink while I'm playing. So the calories from, like, obviously sugar is it's like quite quickly digestible. And actually I forget what the statistic is, but something like a lot of the calories of, just brain function is actually, a lot of the calories you take in is used by brain function. So you want to have something that's like, if you have other foods that are quickly digestible, by the time you get to the end of a series, you can't even fucking think anymore. So sugary drinks are kind of like, you don't want to just, again, smash yourself. You don't want to just drink heaps and then you can't even think anymore. It's like you just slowly drink as you play. That I've actually found that's actually been quite helpful. I've been able to like string out that. I'll get to mindset in just a second, but I'll just talk about this next one, which is about music. So music, again, everybody has a different perception about how it's going to make them feel when they do listen to it. Sometimes it can make you overstimulated. Sometimes it can make you understimulated. And there's actually this topic that I've been learning about recently, which is about this inverted U hypothesis, which basically means, like, I'll show you a picture of it on screen now. And it basically talks about how if you're overstimulated, you're able to do less complex tasks easier because your body's obviously just like ready to go. But more difficult tasks, more finer thinking skills, which I've definitely seen, and again, I'll mention it about that in a second, become more difficult to do because your body is like so ready. So there's actually a benefit to that, but we don't need that if we're playing Quake, or maybe depending on what game you actually play. If you're understimulated, on the other hand, it's like you're almost bored to play, and you don't want that either. You want to be like engaged enough where you want to do the task, but not so disengaged where you can't even be bothered with it. Now we're going to talk about mindset, which is probably actually, like, honestly, it's actually hilarious about this is that a lot of the previous points don't even really matter until you actually really master this one. And it's not at as things progress, I actually do get progressively better at this myself, because I actually don't even do it to the extent that I want to as well. And that pretty much is the perspective of winning and losing and how you perceive events. So, for example, like if you actually have, let's take the example. If you actually win a game, sometimes you actually have, like, again, you get overexcited or you get more excited, and then you also become like more egotistical rather than focusing on actually what's happening. So, it's good to like celebrate wins, but at the same time, you don't want to make that your identity to the point where you're actually not living in reality. Now, that sounds a bit strange, but what I really want to like focus on is just the more you're thinking about yourself, you're inside your own head, you're not actually thinking about what's happening in the game anymore. And you can obviously see how that'd be not what you want. And there's kind of like a paradox here. Like, people that lose, they've got nothing to be prideful about, so it's almost like they have it easier. If you lose a game, it's actually easier to like figure out how to progress, because you kind of like, well, again, it's very contextual, but you could say that they're more in the zone to be less about themselves, because they've got nothing to be about themselves about. They're fucking lost. So yeah, and again, so now we're looking at if you're losing matches as well, you're not making that get to you. It's like, nobody ever plays perfectly. You never actually have, sometimes you can play perfectly, but it doesn't happen all the time. Or something that you have in your head that doesn't go to plan, you have to say to yourself, it's weird. It's like a psychological concept where you're constantly accepting what's happening, regardless of positive or negative, and that's how you're in the best state to get where you need to go. Because, even from my own experience as well, I know that like there have been moments where I could do it, my ego got to me, and then I couldn't do it. And I think that that's actually like, call it destiny for whatever reason. I think that's actually basically, me saying to myself, I cannot win until I've let go of my ego to actually want to win. And for a lot of people that might not make sense, but I think for me that makes a lot of sense actually about why it happens like that. The next one is about focusing agents. So, for example, like, again, pre-workouts with no caffeine, but purely like, it sounds kind of stuff you could like take at the gym. So literally like, increases blood flow, or similar to like what sugar does, where it kind of like increases, well, you can use the carbs as energy to focus, and I'm not really sure what those other things are, but I'm kind of testing with that myself too. So if that actually does help, again, we don't want to be overstimulated. You want to like play with, you want to play in like a regular state. You want to play with, if you're just normal, if you're thinking clearly, you're not trying to like lift heavy weights if you're at the gym or something like that. But again, it's like, I just have the other note here that I had the other day, which is, if you're on caffeine, you're thinking about too many scenarios. You're trying to create something that, as much, it's probably amazing. The idea you could probably create is probably amazing. It's probably like really cool. But when you compare that to someone who like, I use the example of, I always have the idea of Danica in my head because he's like my rival to beat. And something that I always think about is like, it's always complicated, these complex ideas, or someone could just hit really nice shots a couple in a row and you're dead. Then your idea, or that complex idea that you spent many minutes thinking about, is now no longer relevant. So you got to ask yourself like the amount of energy you spent into that, and the fact that you can recognize that doesn't really matter anymore. Sometimes you can even do these plans and it still doesn't work out. It's like, okay, again, accepting that, you don't only have to get your ego, get to yourself. Sometimes you can make an idea and it doesn't work out. So again, like the next point I have is about stretching the whole body. Sometimes I don't necessarily like doing that as well. I mean, if you're in a gaming session, you want to kind of have like your body, over time, it'll actually get like tighter and tighter as the day goes. If you want to stretch, you want to do it at a period where you're not going to play in the next 15 minutes. It's like, how do I say? Because if you stretch and you go back to playing again, your body's like not how it was just before you started playing, obviously because you just stretched out. Whereas if you're playing for the constantly or over time, your body gets tighter and tighter and tighter, but you're still in a similar state to as what you were before. So stretching just completely, depending on how much you stretch for as well, can totally like make you, I really feel it turns you into a different person, because you're actually not who your brain, it's hard to describe, but you're like, your body is, moving your mouse and moving all those movements precisely to how you're feeling in that exact moment. If you stretch quite profusely, then go play, the acute movements are not the same. So it's almost like if you kind of stretch for a bit, take a break, play a warm-up for a little bit, then play, I think you'll be in a much better spot. The last one, this is something that like I've just kind of added in. It's called blood shunting. So pretty much like, I really find this is due to if you're able to exercise prior to an event, if you're just able to get your body to like a good physical state, because that's actually like, there's a kind of a big part of this too, is if you're sitting in a chair and an event happens and you get quite anxious about it, so let's say you make a mistake and the game turns quite drastically, there's like 30 seconds left, you've got to frag him in that time, your heart goes from like, resting heart rate 70 beats per minute, it's like 120. It's quite a visceral feeling you get. If you're able to exercise more, I've actually had moments where like I can literally regulate that quite well. For people that don't exercise so much, that might not make much sense, but I've had moments where like literally I've felt that and I've been able to like recognize that and kind of like push that all around my body very quickly, or kind of just readjust. So I would like kind of look into that. Definitely, I would like recommend exercising. I'm a little bit biased, but yeah, definitely get into that. Okay, guys, hopefully that made sense. That was probably a bit of a long one. I think there's like a lot of good points in there. Some of them are not completely refined, but they're definitely something that I use myself, and I found that, again, take those little things into consideration, but the biggest thing is mindset, and a lot of people would lose there. If you can like master that, and a lot of that is to do with like being humble and recognizing those things. Sometimes like people that are too it's paradoxical, like people that are too arrogant will always beat people that are scared, But once you're once you're in a place of action, you can beat someone who's arrogant. So it's kind of it's like cyclical, like using that word. Again, if you're scared, you'll lose to somebody who's arrogant. But if you're focused, you'll beat someone who's arrogant, and then you'll just crush the person who's scared because it's not even a game at that point. But that's the only way to And then it's about if you're playing a battle of arrogance, then you have a stage where it's like the person. It sounds kind of weird, but the person who's more arrogant will actually win because they're more committed to that. But every time that the arrogant person makes a mistake, they feel it quite harshly. That's like the how do I say, the counterpoint to being kind of in that mind state. Okay, I've already talked too much, guys. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be sure to answer them. All right, I'll see you next time.